Welcome, fellow thrill seekers. If you're ready to feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, then you've come to the right place. Tonight, I've got 3 terrifying tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. From haunted hotels to encounters with the unknown, these stories aren't for the faint of heart. So dim the lights, grab a blanket, and prepare yourself for a journey into the darkest corners of fear. Are you ready? Let's begin. It was the kind of vacation you dream about, a serene escape to Bali, where the air smelled like salt and spice, and the sunsets looked painted from another world. Sarah and Mark, a young couple, had been planning their honeymoon for months. They'd heard stories of Bali's rich culture, the tranquil beaches, and the luxury resorts. The Hotel Lotus, a secluded getaway nestled on the outskirts of Ubud, seemed like the perfect spot for them to relax and reconnect. It had a 5-star reputation, with lush gardens, infinity pools, and a sense of timeless beauty. But as soon as they stepped into the lobby, something felt off. The lobby was grand, yet there was a coldness about it, almost as if it hadn't seen any visitors in years. The staff were kind, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. The walls were adorned with intricate Balinese carvings, but they looked oddly faded, like the craftsmanship had been abandoned midway through. The receptionist handed them a key to their room, a brass key with a number 13 engraved on it. Sarah chuckled nervously. "Isn't 13 unlucky?" she teased, but the receptionist didn't laugh. Instead, he just nodded solemnly, his eyes lingering on them for a moment too long before turning away. The room was on the 3rd floor, down a long, dimly lit hallway. They had booked a suite, but as they walked through the hall, it felt more like a forgotten wing of the hotel. The air was heavy, thick with an unsettling silence. The hotel's other floors seemed to be completely empty. They passed numerous rooms, all locked, with no sign of life, and the only sound was their footsteps echoing off the polished floors. When they entered room 13, Sarah felt an immediate chill. The room was beautifully furnished in traditional Balinese style, with an oversized bed, a balcony that overlooked a private garden, and a large window that allowed the moonlight to spill into the room. But something wasn't right. The temperature was colder than it should have been, and there was a faint, musty smell lingering in the air. Mark tried to brush it off. "It's just the air conditioning," he said, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. They unpacked and settled in, trying to enjoy their first night in Bali. But as they lay in bed, Sarah noticed something strange. The mirror above the vanity was reflecting the room, but it wasn't quite right. The reflection was off. The bed, in the reflection, was positioned differently, and the walls behind it were faded, as though the image in the mirror was from another time, another version of the room. Sarah's heart raced, and she quickly turned away, but when she glanced back at the mirror, it was normal again. She tried to convince herself it was just the exhaustion of travel, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. The next morning, they went out to explore the island, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. She would catch glimpses of shadows in the corner of her eye, fleeting moments where the air felt unnaturally cold, but every time she looked, there was nothing there. The feeling only intensified as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the hotel grounds. That night, they decided to dine at the hotel's restaurant. The menu was exquisite, offering local delicacies and fresh seafood. But as they ate, Sarah noticed the staff watching them, observing them with an intensity that made her skin crawl. There was an eerie tension in the air. She whispered to Mark, "I think something's wrong with this place." Mark dismissed her concerns. "We're just in a new place. You're probably just tired." But as they returned to their room, things took a turn. The hotel seemed even quieter than before. The hallways were empty, and the once beautiful garden outside their window now appeared dark and foreboding. As they passed room 12, Sarah's blood ran cold. The door was slightly ajar, and she could swear she heard soft whispers coming from inside. When they reached room 13, the door creaked open on its own, despite them clearly having closed it earlier. The temperature had dropped even further, and a faint, distant sound of something scratching echoed from somewhere inside the room. Sarah's heart pounded as she looked around. The bed was rumpled, the covers twisted as if someone had been lying there. But they hadn't touched the bed. Neither of them had been in the room for hours. That night, as they lay in bed, the whispering began. It started softly, just a murmur at the edge of her hearing. But soon it grew louder, distinct voices, too low to understand but filled with malice. It was as if someone was speaking directly into her ear, their words growing sharper and more urgent as the night dragged on. Unable to sleep, Sarah tossed and turned. She looked over at Mark, but he was sound asleep, his breathing steady. She tried to ignore the whispers, but they were relentless. At one point, she swore she saw a figure standing at the foot of the bed, a shadowy, indistinct figure that seemed to shift in the darkness. She blinked, and it was gone. She didn't dare to close her eyes after that. Around 3 a.m., she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate steps that seemed to grow closer. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no way anyone else was staying in the hotel. They hadn't seen another soul all day. As the footsteps grew louder, they suddenly stopped right outside their door. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, but then it grew louder, more insistent. 3 knocks in rapid succession, followed by a pause, then another set of knocks. Sarah was paralyzed with fear. She could hear Mark breathing deeply, unaware of the nightmare unfolding just beyond the door. The knocking continued, but the door stayed still. She wanted to open it, to see who was there, but something told her that doing so would be the worst mistake of her life. The next morning, they hurriedly packed their bags, their nerves frayed from the night's terror. As they checked out, the receptionist gave them a strange, almost sympathetic look. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice too calm, too rehearsed. When they nodded, trying to hide their panic, he added, "You are the first guests to stay in room 13 for a very long time." Sarah froze. "What do you mean?" The receptionist's face darkened. "It is a room that many prefer not to speak of." Before they could ask more, he handed them their bill and turned away, his expression cold and distant. As they left the hotel, Sarah's gaze lingered on the building. In the reflection of the large windows, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a figure standing in the window of room 13, watching them as they walked away. The figure raised a hand, waving slowly, as though bidding them goodbye. But there was something wrong with the smile on its face. It wasn't human. The eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to stare right into her soul. Sarah grabbed Mark's hand and pulled him away, her heart pounding in her chest. They didn't speak a word on the way to the car, both too terrified to acknowledge what had just happened. As the hotel faded from view, Sarah looked back one last time. Room 13 was still there, and so was the figure. The forgotten room at the Hotel Lotus had claimed its next victims. Story number 2, the Kintamani Resort. Imagine a paradise where the air is thick with the scent of frangipani, the landscape is breathtaking, and the only sounds are the chirping of cicadas. Now, imagine that same paradise slowly turning into a nightmare, a place where the line between reality and terror blurs. In the heart of Bali, I checked into the Kintamani Resort, an idyllic escape, or so I thought. But the moment I entered my room, something felt wrong. A suffocating stillness, a strange metallic smell, and an ancient, lurking presence that wouldn't let me go. What started as vivid dreams quickly turned into something far worse, something far more sinister. The woman in the photograph, her face hidden by shadow, wasn't just a memory, she was waiting for me. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the terrifying story of my stay at the Kintamani Resort. A place where ancient rituals, restless spirits, and dark forces collide. Stay close and listen carefully, because this is a tale you won't soon forget. The humid Bali air hung heavy, thick with the scent of frangipani and something else, something metallic. I checked into the Kintamani Resort, a sprawling complex nestled near the volcanic lake. It was supposed to be a tranquil escape, but an unsettling quiet clung to the place, broken only by the cicadas' incessant chirping. My room, 207, overlooked the lake, a view that was breathtakingly beautiful, yet strangely oppressive. That first night, the dreams started. Vivid, disturbing visions of shadowy figures moving just beyond my peripheral vision, whispers in a language I didn't understand, and the persistent feeling of being watched. I woke in a cold sweat, the room bathed in moonlight, everything seemingly normal. But the feeling lingered, a prickling unease that crawled beneath my skin. The next day, I tried to shake it off. I explored the resort, the lush gardens, the serene pools. But the unsettling feeling persisted. The staff seemed distant, their smiles strained. I noticed a faded photograph in the lobby, a group picture of the hotel's original owners. One figure, a woman in a white dress, was partially obscured by shadow, her face indistinct. There was something deeply unsettling about it. That night, the dreams intensified. I saw the woman from the photograph, her face now clear, contorted in a silent scream. She was pointing at something behind me, a dark figure lurking in the corner of the room. I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding. This time, the room felt different. Colder. The air was thick with that metallic scent again. I fumbled for the light switch, but the lamp flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. A scraping sound came from the closet. Slowly, deliberately, the door creaked open. My breath hitched. I could see nothing in the darkness, but I knew something was there. A cold gust of wind swept across the room, raising goosebumps on my arms. Then, a whisper right next to my ear, "You shouldn't have come." I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for my phone. The screen illuminated the room, revealing nothing. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I checked the closet, the bathroom, under the bed. Nothing. I was starting to question my sanity. The following days were a blur of growing terror. The whispers became more frequent, more distinct. "Leave," they hissed. "She's watching." I started seeing things out of the corner of my fleeting shadows, movements in the reflection of the windows. The metallic smell was constant now, clinging to everything. I researched the history of the hotel. I discovered that it had been built on the site of an old Balinese temple, a place of ancient rituals and, according to local legends, dark sacrifices. The woman in the photograph, I learned, was the wife of the original owner. She had died mysteriously within the hotel walls, her death shrouded in whispers and rumors. One evening, I found a hidden door in my room, concealed behind a tapestry. It led to a narrow, winding staircase that descended into darkness. Driven by a morbid curiosity, I descended. The air grew colder, the metallic scent overpowering. The staircase opened into a small, stone chamber. In the center, a stone altar. Stains, dark and ominous, marred its surface. A low moan echoed through the chamber. I turned to see the woman in the white dress standing in the shadows. Her eyes, hollow and black, were fixed on me. She raised a hand, pointing towards the altar. Then she spoke, her voice a raspy whisper, "He's waiting." A figure emerged from the darkness behind her. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that burned like embers. He wore a long, dark robe, and in his hand he held a gleaming knife. He smiled, a chilling, predatory smile. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You've finally arrived." I turned to flee, but the woman in white blocked my path. The man in the robe advanced, his knife glinting in the dim light. I was trapped. He lunged, the knife flashing. I screamed, bracing for the impact. But it never came. Instead, I felt a sharp, searing pain in my head. My vision blurred. The man in the robe and the woman in white began to fade, their forms flickering like dying embers. The stone chamber dissolved around me, replaced by my hotel room. I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing. The lamp was on, casting a warm glow across the room. Everything was normal. Too normal. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by the oppressive heat and the strange stories I'd heard? I sat up, my heart still pounding. Then I saw it. On the bedside table, a single white frangipani flower, and beneath it, a small, intricately carved wooden box. I opened it. Inside, a single, blood-soaked knife. A cold hand gripped my shoulder. I turned to see the woman in white, her eyes now filled with a chilling triumph. She smiled, a truly horrifying smile. And then she whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear it. The dream never ends. The room went dark. My scream echoed into the night, swallowed by the silence of the Kintamani resort, a silence that would remain unbroken forever. Story number 3, The Wija Curse, Death Awaits at Bali Ridge Hotel. Bali is known for its beauty, its tranquility, and its endless paradise. But for 3 friends who checked into the Bali Ridge Hotel, paradise quickly turned into something far darker. What began as a simple game with a Ouija board awakened something that should have been left alone, a curse tied to the hotel's blood-soaked past. The halls are empty now, but the whispers still linger. And once you hear them, there's no turning back. Let's begin. It was supposed to be a dream vacation. Bali. Sunsets over the ocean, rich culture, lush jungles, everything was perfect. At least, that's what I thought when I booked my stay at the Bali Ridge Hotel. A secluded resort, perched on a cliff with views so stunning they could take your breath away. But what I didn't know, what no one warned me, was that this hotel had a dark history, one tied to the spirits that still linger there, waiting for new souls to join them. I arrived with my friends, Mark and Ellie, eager for adventure. The hotel was beautiful at first glance. Old-world charm met tropical luxury, with carved wooden doors, ornate Balinese lanterns hanging from trees, and flowers blooming in every corner. Yet, there was something about it, something unsettling. The air was thick with humidity, the air too still, as though something was holding its breath, waiting for the right moment. We checked in with the receptionist, an older woman with a tight smile, her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite place. Her voice was soft, but firm as she handed us our keys, her fingers brushing against mine a little too long. "Room 314, she said, and her smile deepened. "Be careful, this hotel is not what it seems. Never stay out too late." It was the kind of warning you'd laugh off, a quirky local superstition, right? But something in the back of my mind made me shiver as we made our way to the room. Our suite was at the end of a long corridor, far from the main lobby. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint rustling of the palms outside. Room 314 was large, with a grand 4-poster bed, an antique wooden wardrobe, and large windows that overlooked the jungle below. The view was magnificent, but it was hard to shake the strange feeling that came over me the moment we crossed the threshold. Later that night, after dinner, we were lounging on the balcony, sipping cocktails, when Ellie pulled something out of her bag. "You know, I found this at a local market today," she said, her voice casual but her eyes glinting with excitement. She placed a small wooden box on the table between us. The lid creaked as she opened it, revealing an old, tarnished Ouija board. A shiver ran down my spine as I stared at the board, the intricate carvings, the planchette, the faded letters. It felt wrong, as though the board had been touched by something ancient and dark. But Ellie was already pulling the planchette across the board, laughing nervously. "Come on, you're all chicken, right?" she teased, her fingers brushing the planchette. "Let's see what this thing can really do." Mark chuckled and rolled his eyes. "It's just a game, Ellie. Nothing to be scared of." I wasn't so sure. But I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I played along, despite the rising sense of dread creeping over me. We began asking questions, silly things at first. Is there anyone here with us? The planchette didn't move. We laughed, thinking it was just a joke. Then Mark asked, "Who built this hotel?" He grinned. "Come on, tell us, Wija, who's the spirit in charge?" The planchette moved. It wasn't fast at first, but it was unmistakable. Slowly, it slid across the board, spelling out the name Yuda. Yuda? Who's Yuda? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I tried to laugh it off, but my stomach was in knots. The name felt heavy, oppressive. Ellie smirked. Some old guy who built the hotel, maybe? Or a ghost. I bet it's just a coincidence. But then the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and the shadows around us grew darker. I shivered, suddenly feeling the weight of something watching us, something just out of sight. I reached for the board, feeling a strange compulsion to ask more questions. What happened to Yuda? The planchette moved again, slowly, deliberately. It spelled out one word, death. Suddenly, the room felt different, colder, heavier. The lights flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw something in the reflection of the window, just a shadow, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I felt a pressure on my chest, like the air itself was pressing down on me. "Okay, that's enough," I said, pushing the board away. "This isn't funny anymore." But Ellie and Mark didn't seem to hear me. They were both staring at the board, their faces pale, their eyes wide. The planchette moved again, this time with a sharp, almost violent jerk. It stopped on the letters, Kill. I froze. A chill ran through my body, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. The shadows in the room twisted, as if they were alive, reaching toward us. My heart raced. I stood up, knocking the Ouija board to the floor. "Ellie, we need to stop." "This isn't a joke," I said, my voice shaking. But Ellie didn't answer. She was staring at the floor, her eyes wide with terror. She looked different. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. And then she spoke, but it wasn't her voice. It was lower, raspier, almost guttural. "You shouldn't have played with me." The room went dark. I stumbled backward, heart pounding in my chest. The sounds of breathing, deep, ripe breaths, came from the corners of the room. But no one was there. I tried to turn on the light, but the switch did nothing. Panic gripped me as I realized the hotel had gone completely silent. Not a sound, not even the wind. The air grew thick with the scent of something metallic, like iron and rust. A cold, clammy sweat formed on my forehead. I turned to look at Ellie, but she was no longer sitting there. The only thing left in her place was the Ouija board, now glowing faintly, as though it had become a portal into something terrible. Suddenly, Mark screamed. I whipped around to find him backed into the corner, his eyes wide with terror as he pointed at the ceiling. There, hanging from the rafters, was a figure, tall and emaciated, its face twisted into an agonizing scream. The thing slowly began to descend, its hands reaching out for us. "Yuda," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. Before I could react, the figure lunged and everything went black. I woke up hours later, drenched in sweat, back in the hotel room. The lights were on. The board was gone. Mark and Ellie were nowhere to be found. I searched the hotel, calling their names, but the place felt like a tomb. Every door I opened led to nothing. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I went back to the lobby to confront the receptionist, but she was gone too. The hotel had turned into an empty shell. That night, I stayed in the same room, too terrified to leave. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, and the metallic smell never left. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Yuda's face. The last thing I remember before I blacked out was the faint whisper of the Ouija board's voice. "You are next." The Bali Ridge Hotel still stands, but no one ever stays there anymore. The staff is gone, and the hotel is now nothing more than a ruin, an empty shell of what it once was. The locals speak of it in hushed tones, warning travelers to avoid it at all costs. As for me, I left Bali that night, but I still hear the whispers when I close my eyes. And I know one thing for certain, the Ouija board isn't just a game. It's a doorway, one that should never be opened. Because once you invite them in, you can never leave.